So I just kind of wanted to start with your impressive resume of all like the achievements just really conquered throughout your experience in the Paralympics. So you're a 10-time Paralympic medalist and three-time Paralympian in London, Rio, and Tokyo. And recently you won gold, I believe, in the 100 meter in Tokyo and silver in the 400 and the 1500 meter. Is that correct?
Yep, that's all right.
And then I also read somewhere that you are the first man to win five individual world titles at a single IPC event as well.
Yes, that's also true. That was, I think, back in 2013.
So I am feeling like I need to go do more with my life because you are just conquering the world, man. So congratulations on everything that you've achieved so far. But I definitely wanted to start from the beginning and kind of what really served as the catalyst for your time in racing, as well as just like growing up with arthrogryposis. So actually, let's start there. So having arthrogryposis and I believe specifically Freeman-Sheldon Syndrome, is that correct? So can you tell us what your upbringing looked like as a child and kind of understanding the reality of disability?
Yeah, so I grew up with Freeman-Sheldon Syndrome, so it's congenital, and I was the only one in the family that actually has it. So after I was born and diagnosed, both of my parents saw a geneticist, and they found out that they're both carriers of the gene. Um, so I am the only one in my family who does have arthrogryposis. So it's a little bit different growing up, learning how to kind of navigate having a disability, having arthrogryposis. But I did start, I went to school for children with disabilities. So a whole bunch of different types of mostly physical disabilities. And I went there until I was 5, but that's actually where I started racing. So the school had a racing team there. And when I was in gym class, I was approached by the coach who saw I was pretty active, like moving around, and asked me if I wanted to get started. So I've been doing it ever since.
Wow. And I guess how many like racing chairs have you been through? Like, is it like a constant change or?
Yeah, so I've been through a ton of chairs throughout ever since I started. It's been what 20 plus years. So typically they last usually about 2 years when you're racing professionally, maybe. Actually made this last one last quite a long time. I actually I'm pretty sure that's the same chair I had in Rio. So I think I made it last all the way from Rio to Tokyo. So, but generally, yeah, we do go through racing chairs about once a year, once every other year.
So that kind of brings me into my next question. Like, what does your training regimen look like?
Yeah, so training going into Tokyo for me looked a little bit different this time. Normally, what I would do is we'd have about 8 sessions a week, maybe 10 sessions a week, depending on the week. We work out Monday through Friday, sometimes Saturday. So that means, getting 2 sessions in, one in the morning, one in the afternoon. We would definitely be in our racing chairs for a session every day. So that usually lasts about an hour or so. And then on the afternoon, it would alternate between getting another session in a race chair for another half hour, 45 minutes. And then the other option in the afternoon was going to the gym. So lifting weights, getting some strength training in. So it's what a typical pre-games training looks like. For me, it looked a little bit different. I just started PA school, so that happened in June, and the games were in August. So I had to figure out how to train for Tokyo while I was here at PA school.
Now, when you got to Tokyo, what was kind of your way of getting your head into the game when you were in Tokyo?
when you're at the games, it's definitely a different experience than other competitions like world championships. So you stay at the athlete village, same village you would in the Olympic Games. And that really sets the tone, I would say, for where you are, because you're living in the athlete village with all the other athletes from all the other sports, not just your own, and all the other countries, and everyone's together. And it really sets the tone for you're at the Paralympic Games. This is the time to shine. So that's definitely how uh, it kind of felt going in. Even though it was not my first games, it still feels that way.
Yeah.
I think what people don't um, maybe know about is the training isn't just a few months leading into Tokyo. It's everything in between that adds up to how you're going to perform at the games. So you have a race like the 100-meter was about 17 seconds. And so everything that you do between Tokyo and Paris or Rio and Tokyo um, all works toward those 17 seconds. So it's kind of mind boggling if you think about it.
So now that you're back home, what sparked your interest in becoming a PA or just that field of study?
The reason I wanted to go into medicine was not just really one thing, it was a bunch of different things. So I really wanted to help people, which is very cliche. You ask all the med students, everybody applying to med school, PA school. I also really enjoyed learning the science while I was an undergrad. So that's really kind of where it changed for me. So I took a biology class in undergrad, and there's a lecture about genetics, which didn't really have a human component to it. So it wasn't like population genetics. It was very science, very like molecular. So kind of takes all the humanism out of it. But there was a part of the lecture where he talked about how there's a genetic disease that if there's a change in one small part of your DNA, it's devastating, and it changes your life to where you age the entire lifespan and just, I want to say about 6 years or so. So you go through the entire aging process just very, very quickly. And that really moved me, and it kind of pointed me in the direction of medicine. So from there, it was just what in medicine. So there's so many areas in healthcare that you can work in. I just need to find my where. So that's kind of where I found PA school, and that was 5 years ago. So 6 years ago. So that's kind of where that's where I would say I took my first concrete step toward wanting to work in medicine.
It's kind of like thinking into the future. Now that you're 27 and have experienced many life experiences, what does having arthrogryposis mean to you currently at this stage of your life? I guess kind of like comparing it to what you used to think of disability as a child.
Growing up, I went to a school for children with disabilities, like I said earlier. However, that was only until I was 5. And then they actually recommended I be sent to public school. And so my parents did that. And when I went to public school, I was the only person in my classes who had disability. So it was different kind of going from a school where all your classmates kind of resemble you, right? Everybody's got disability, everybody's got something going on. And then going to public school where you're very clearly the odd man out. That was an interesting transition for sure, but I kind of got used to it. I got used to being, the person in a wheelchair in the class. And I think that I didn't realize how hard that was sometimes, because people just had a really hard time relating to some things. And that's even true today. Leaving shoes on the floor is like not great for someone when you live with someone in a wheelchair, because we can't just go over them, or when we do, it's like we can't step over them, right? Like we have to run them over, and it's a huge, it's a small thing, but it's a huge obstacle, I would say. Even going from, being at this stage of my life, some people have very minimal experience with people with disabilities. So what I've learned over time is to not keep those things to myself, and to take the opportunity to educate when the moment arises, right? When it's appropriate. You don't just like go educating people who don't want to be educated, who, you're just going into the street. But if you need something a certain way, or if you need adaptations for whatever reason, or something just doesn't work for you, you need to be able to speak up for yourself, because the chances are the person you're talking to just had no idea. It didn't even occur to them. It's not that they are ableist necessarily. That's a big buzzword right now, or anything like that. It's just they didn't know. So
Yeah,
just go ahead and tell them. So I would say that's kind of the biggest change I've noticed over time as I've grown up, is to kind of embrace having a disability and being okay with kind of sharing my experience. We start so young in terms of teaching us not to communicate about it, really. Like, you see someone who uses a wheelchair on the street, and a kid points out that they're in a wheelchair, and like, that's an observation. Kids make observations. They say things all the time, right? But shunning them away, like, oh, don't say anything, don't like look at them, like, that's very like archaic. And I would say that it's kind of goes into creeping into ableism, in terms of
yeah,
not associating, don't kind of leave them be, kind of thing. So all that's to say is, I was a person who kids would kind of point out, right? And I watched the parents say, oh, don't say anything, don't. So I learned that maybe I shouldn't be talking about it, right? So it kind of works both ways, which is odd. So I think it's important to really open up the conversation and start it young.
I was speaking with another individual who also has AMC, and we were talking about how schools, they should actually implement some sort of like disability like studies, or kind of like disability classes, where these types of conversations are not left in gray area, because oftentimes the kids who have like the actual disability, they don't even, like we're talking, we don't even know how to communicate those difficulties. Like, you have an amazing point where it really starts at like that impressionable age of needing to talk about how disability is not necessarily something that is taboo to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I didn't have that growing up, right? You just kind of, your experience was just to that, to those that are like close to you, to your proximity. Now that we have, social media, the internet, all that stuff, like, we have access to so much more information now that, before it was okay, well, not okay, but it was understandable that you had not experienced someone with disability. You've never had an experience with someone with disability. But now that we're kind of moving toward way more social media, a lot more connectedness, like, it's probably not uncommon for people to have that experience now.
Very last question before we get to 3 fun questions. What has helped you throughout your journey, in terms of if anyone's ever said anything to you, or anything that's been helpful?
Definitely community is the biggest thing. So when I was between the time when I was at the school for kids with disabilities, and when I was an undergrad, which I was on a team of wheelchair racers, so I was surrounded by people with disabilities. In between that time, I would say that the time that I looked forward to most every week was going to practice for racing, because I got to be around other people with disabilities. And it's not to say you should only associate with other people with disabilities, but it's really nice to be able to learn from each other. Going back to that piece earlier I said about your other peers at school who may not have a disability, it's just hard to relate to some things. And being around people who have disabilities, it's sometimes it's just way easier. You don't have to explain a lot. You don't, it's kind of a thing that you have in common, like a almost instant shared bond. So I would say definitely do that. A big way I have done that was through sports. So I definitely encourage people to go check out Paralympic sports. Very fun, very hard, intense, but you meet a ton of great people and you meet a lot of great role models too. So most of my journey kind of came through undergrad, where I was on a team, was a racing team. So I had sort of people to look up to who were wheelchair users who kind of knew the ropes and kind of, I would say, took my disability game to the next level. I would say, I knew how to function, I knew how to like get through, but they kind of really, I would say, elevated my disability game. So definitely look into getting a community.
So thank you for that. And now we have 3 fun questions. My first question is, what is your favorite go-to midnight snack?
I'm gonna go back to dark chocolate. I think my snacks kind of ebbs and flows in terms of whether I like sweet and salty. Usually I don't have a sweet tooth, which is why I prefer dark chocolate. White chocolate is disgusting. But I kind of flip back and forth between, the sweets and the dark chocolates, and then sort of the salties, the chips and things like that. So
next question, what is your guilty pleasure song?
Oh man, I would say you should look at my Spotify because it's probably just playlists of guilty pleasure. But let's see. If I had to pick one song, we'll go with my guilty pleasure song is Shake It Off by Taylor Swift.
Okay, and last question. If you can just pick up and go to any country, excluding the ones that you've been to for your Paralympic competitions, where would you want to go and why?
Oh, Singapore. So Singapore is one of the ones that I actually wanted to go to Singapore, but I was planning on doing before the games were pushed back. So Tokyo was going to be 2020. I would have time between Tokyo and PA school. So what I was going to do was stay in Asia for a couple weeks, go to Thailand, go to Singapore, do a couple of quick trips since I was already in Asia. But Singapore definitely is a place I want to visit.
That is cool. I've seen really awesome, beautiful pictures on Google Maps and images.
Yeah, it looks great, and the street food I hear is unreal. So that's definitely on my to-do list.
Overall, thank you so much for speaking with me and letting us into your world a bit.